Hello, Justice Con. My name is Clayton. And my name is Connor. And we are the Twins of Destruction. We are both aspiring costume designers and constructors, and have a passion for many things, including DC Comics. Today, we will be showing you how to make a costume for cosplay or film. We will be going through the many steps, including concepting, designing, and finally, building. In this presentation, we will show you how you can make a Martian Manhunter costume and several other Martian Manhunter affiliated costumes, and use design details to tell stories through costume. We hope you enjoy. Here are the costumes we're going to be showing you how to make, as well as our concept art to see how we did compared to our original ideas. To begin this project, we started by writing down story ideas and how we can incorporate costume into them. Technically, we started making this costume last year when we participated in the Martian Manhunter competition, where participants had to recreate the storyboard hallway scene. We decided to create our own latex Martian Manhunter mask. We started by looking at comic source material. We liked Martians that looked kind of human, but had a peculiar look about them. Many sources stemmed back to Alex Ross. After our designs were drawn, we got to sculpting. Because the mannequin we had was really too small, we actually built up clay to match our head proportions. After that was done, we began adding details such as the brow, the chin, and the mouth areas. Once the sculpt was complete, we painted many layers of liquid latex right on top of the sculpture, making sure not to miss any spots. After several layers were on top, it was time to paint. Now, truth be told, we used the wrong kind of paint. We actually used liquid latex house paint. While it looks good when it is still, it does not stretch very well and will tear eventually, which is what happened. Regardless, we put on several coats of mown grass color, as well as adding a brown tint to the brow and to the cheeks to accentuate all of the details. If you were to make this mask, I would use actual liquid latex paint, which would come from companies like Monster Makers. To create the eyes, we used plastic orbs from Hobby Lobby and colored them with Sharpie marker. Then we cut out a one-way mirror Halloween mask and backed the plastic with it. We used hot glue to secure it in place. You may be wondering if this can be seen out of. The answer is not exactly, but for what we are doing, it works. If you're doing this for cosplay, you can get red sunglass lenses and glue those into place and will have better visibility. To add on the lips, we built up layers of liquid latex and applied them onto the mouth area. We went through a few versions of this before we found what we actually liked. We then put thinner strips of latex to cover the connection of the lips to the mouth.
This rebroadcast of the Connie Boswell Show is a presentation of Radio Service.
Our first costume came about from thinking what we had in our stock of costumes. Since we didn't have time to sew or make anything, we had to use what we already had and come up with something unique. We put on a long black sleeve shirt and found strips of red fabric that came from an old ninja Halloween costume. We safety pinned everything in place and positioned the camera just out of view of the safety pins. We found this costume to be quite interesting, and it worked really well for what we achieved. It was very useful to know how to mix and match pieces to make something out of nothing, but we knew one day that we were going to upgrade it and make an official Martian Manhunter costume. Our main ideas for an official costume stemmed from two places: the original designs of Martian Manhunter from 1955, and costume designer Michael Wilkinson's design from Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, and Justice League. Michael decided to tell a story with his costumes, and we attempted to emulate the same feeling. Some of Michael's costumes have relation to a culture or a country of origin, like mentioned here in this clip.
And rather than the traditional thing, which was made out of the cloth that his parents wrapped him in when he was sent off from Krypton, in our version, the Superman suit is, in a sense, it's like the foundation, it's the undergarment that all Kryptonians wear. It's kind of like what a medieval chainmail suit is to the knights of the medieval times. That's the same as our sort of Superman suit, which in fact has a chainmail motif on it.
Superman wears a chainmail-like underwear due to his people's culture back on Krypton. We decided to make similar choices with our Martian designs. One of our first ideas was to incorporate ancient Egyptian culture, due to the harsh climate of Mars being similar to that of ancient Egypt. And from the comic source material of images of Mars, they have pyramid-like structures. We decided to follow through with this idea, and our concept design stage began. We had drawn our first concept on paper with colored pencils before moving to a digital rendering. We are using Photoshop, but there are other softwares available, even free softwares like GIMP. You can also use just a pencil and paper for the whole concept stage. Use highlighters, crayons, or different colored Sharpie markers. Maybe even mix all three types of mediums into one drawing. There are no rules in creating your own concept design. Never feel limited in your creative abilities just because you may not have access to a computer or drawing tablet. The Martian Manhunter, or Jean Jeans, has a multitude of costumes over the decades. But something that stuck out to us was his underpants. This is a common theme amongst the superheroes of old, as they were drawn to represent the strongmen of the circus in the old days. We considered the aspect of his origin when attempting to modernize the costume, and came up with the connection to ancient Egyptian culture. The first item we would draw is an Egyptian shenty, which was an item worn by many citizens during much of the ancient Egyptian era. There are many ways to tie an Egyptian shenty, but we wanted the tighter look to once again resemble the underwear type that Jean wears in his comic origin. After that, we drew a black skin suit, which was originally going to be a long black sleeve shirt, but ended up being a black spandex bodysuit. We feel that by adding this gives it a science fiction, alien type look that the Martians may have worn, while also taking inspiration from animations like the Young Justice TV show. We represented the mask in this drawing by coloring in the face green with red eyes. Martian Manhunter's most notable features are the red strips that sit in the formation of an X across his chest. And we drew exactly that. Our plan was to use straps on the shoulders or back to attach them to his costume. Martian Manhunter has had many versions of his cape throughout the years as well. Some, like from the Justice League animated show, had a collar to go with it. We decided to add a hood to him, along with a cape. We took inspiration from Egyptian wear, as they draped a lot of their clothing, as in, wrapped fabric around themselves and secured it in place with a knot or tie. It was mainly women who would drape their clothing, wearing things like gala skirts, or even a calaceris, while also sometimes wearing cloaks or shawls. We drew an outline from a hood based off of a Google search, and put that on top of the drawing of Jean. This way, we can proportion it correctly while already having the shape we need. Using the same color purple, we filled in the hood shape. Then, we drew a cape down his back. The cape yoke on the front was also something that we took from certain source material, like comics, the Injustice video game, and even pop culture. Then we added 2 golden clasps to his cape, as also seen in the source material. Jean's Young Justice design has red details along his black suit, and the Supergirl TV show had him wear an armored suit. We decided to put our own spin on things, taking from what we liked, and made him wear vambraces with some accented detail, again referencing some of the source material in the process, as well as breaking up all of the black color. We also added boots to his costume as to not leave his lower half without any raised detail. This detail added onto the cape yoke resembles that of an Egyptian Wesset collar, and this was no coincidence. The Wesset collar was a type of decorative collar worn by men and women in ancient Egypt. The original goal when making this design was to use an iron-on gold foil to add detail to the fabric collar, but this changed into adding beads instead. We also decided to add a chain link to connect, with a triangle also being cut out of the cape to add detail. The last touch on this design was to add a raised level to his cape clasps. To design the costume for Malefa'ak, Jean's brother, we started with the basic shape of Jean, which was just his black bodysuit and green head. The first thing we added was his chain chest X. Almost all versions of Malefa'ak have a set of chains on him, and on the original concept, it was in the shape of a Y, and resembled more of the look from Justice League Doom, as well as some comics. Unlike Jean, we wanted to give Malefaak gloves, which we already owned and knew what they looked like. We also gave him the same boots that Jean is wearing. We also took the same cloak that we drew on Jean and put it on Malefaak, and eventually we colored it to a bluish color. We then added golden circles to represent clasps to hook the chains in place. We also had the idea to give Malefaak a chain waist belt as well, which was not on the final product. Instead of giving Malefaak a shenty, we gave him a gala skirt, which some historians argue is a different piece of clothing altogether. Some argue the gala skirt is just a shenty with an apron attached. We decided to make Malefaak wear an apron so it would be more flowy and enshroud him, rather than the tighter look on Jean. We dabbled with the idea of making Malefaak's cape torn and distressed, which is something that did not make it to the final product. We also got rid of the hood and added a large collar that is also in the source material of the character. This character design is mainly focused on the idea of more loose clothing. While both do have cloaks, Jean is more focused on tighter clothing, such as his vambraces and shenty. Malefaak is more focused on looser clothing, like his large apron, his wide gloves, and his big collar. Because of his status as a villain, we wanted to use costumes to tell a story regarding his status as such. The character Darth Vader was also inspiration when drawing the apron on the front of Malefaak, as large, flowy shapes are sometimes associated with villainy or evil. We also gave Malefaak a Wesset collar as well, with the same intention of having iron-on gold foil represent the details, but settled for beads instead. Another character who we had incorporated into our story is a white Martian, who, in the comics, are another Martian race from the planet Mars. Just like when creating Malefaak's design, we used the same outline for the white Martian. We debated using a blue and white color scheme before leaning into the idea of using Roman influence in this design. This is partly due to the historical influence that the Romans had on the Egyptians and their wars that involved between the two cultures. What we had drawn was more like a skirt, while the final product is more akin to a subligar, which is a Roman piece of clothing typically worn by gladiators and similar to the shenty. Instead of the white Martian having black vambraces and boots, he will have brown. The white Martian will also be wearing a brown leather cuirass. The vambraces and the armor cuirass will also lace up, and his cloak will also be pinned using a brooch on the shoulder. When making the Green Martian slave outfit, we originally depicted a black tunic with a silver chain wrapped around the wrist. This was a very simple drawing that was later elaborated upon as we started the construction of the costume. We ended up changing the color of the tunic from black to a light blue, and the color of the chains from silver to gold. The Martian slave is wearing the same type of gold chain that Malefaak and Jean are wearing, and this is not a coincidence, because the slave had lost all his liberty and he's being held down and enslaved by the cruel masters. There is definitely a connection to the outfits of Jean and Malefaak. Jean wears a small chain across his breast, which connects the two golden clasps, and those clasps are directly over top of the famous red X. In our head, this was a symbolic gesture, as the gold chain seemed to be supporting the Martian heritage. The classic emblem that is known and loved is locked into place by a sturdy material, with the red X being an important aspect of Martian culture. For Malafak, without giving away spoilers, it is safe to assume that he is a prisoner of his own mind. The slave chains being the same color was also symbolic, as despite Malafak not having chains around his wrists, he still has them around his body, and he is held down and imprisoned by Martian culture and ideology. The chain X is also mirroring that of Jean's red X, showing that Malafak is physically held down by the same chains that enslaved the Green Martians, and in the form of a Martian X no less, something which his character has had personal struggles with in the source material. Then the question arises, is Malafak really as free as he says or thinks he is? This is the type of thing that costume can do. Tell a story that no dialogue can. We change the slave tunic's color from black to blue to slightly resemble Malafak's costume, akin to the chains representing Malafak's costume as well. We feel this change to the design of the slave was important, and is proof that not everything you draw on your design is what you will be using on the final project, as ideas are always changing. Now that your concepts are drawn, it is time to start making your costume. We are using drop cloth that we had bought at Home Depot, which can also be found at other department stores like Lowe's or Ace Hardware. It is a cheaper type of fabric, but it is durable enough to be used as an actual costume. So we figured we would give it a shot on these types of cloaks. So because it is so big, we found the center of it, which had a seam line, and we cut it up the middle so we can wash it in the washing machine. After it was dry, we laid it out flat once again with it double layered. We laid out several templates from the Simplicity 1582 pattern, including the cape yoke front and cape yoke back. These two are the parts of the cape that actually sit on your shoulders. Then we use the cape back. We will only be cutting out 2 of the cape backs because unlike the pattern shows, we will not be making the front of this cape. In the end, you will need 2 cape yoke fronts, 2 cape yoke backs, and 2 cape backs. We also extended the cape back to give as much extra length as possible. After the 2 cape yoke fronts and the 2 cape yoke backs are cut out, you will need them in this formation. You will then sew these parts together to create the shoulder shape needed. After these parts are sewn together, take the cape yoke back and line it up with the cape back. Pin 1 layer of the cape back to the bottom of 1 layer of the cape yoke back and stitch accordingly. After the cape backs are sewn to the cape yokes, then you can sew the cape yokes together. Then you can sew the cape yoke backs together and try it on. This is what it should look like. When we determined that it fit, we marked with a pencil where we wanted to cut the excess fabric from. After the cape is cut to length, it should fall evenly with distributed weight. At this point in the build, you will have ugly seam allowance sticking out from where you attached your pieces on the inside of your cloak. To hide this, you can fold over the ugly edge and actually stitch that part down on its own. This way, it hides the ugly part and gives you a nice clean look. For this cloak in particular, we will not be sewing up the back, as we are basing this cloak design off of Malafak from Justice League Doom, where his cape is split up the back all the way until his shoulders. Because we are not putting on the front cape of this pattern, and we wish to just extend the yoke down farther than his chest, we pin the cloak to the mannequin to get a rough outline of where we want to continue patterning. After we got a rough idea, we took the cloak off and used scrap fabric we pinned an extension, which then allowed us to draw and make a new pattern on top of it. We used painter's tape to once again extend the pattern into the shape we needed. This technique can basically amount to sloping, where we would force fabric into a position as a means of creating a more form-fitting piece. Because we are adapting these patterns, we have to go back and adapt the yoke pattern as well. This is so the new square piece can fit in like a puzzle. We are going to cut out another one of these square patterns so we can flip it over and fit both sides of the cloak. This is the cloak when the new and altered pattern pieces are now put into place. Here is the difference for how the cloak looks. Now, because of the pattern altering, the cloak has a flat front piece similar to the design, while also using the pattern provided. Malifaux has a collar that extends up to around his upper lip to nose area. To make this, we cut out a rectangle of the same fabric and pinned it into a circle surrounding the collar of the cloak. This was so we can assure a comfortable fit while wearing. While the collar is pinned in place, we put the mask on to see how it will look and sewn it over to make it a smooth edge. To make Malifaux's gala skirt, we examined actual gala skirts and Egyptian hieroglyphics, as well as diagrams such as this. Using this diagram in particular, I was able to make a paper template which can then be translated into the same drop cloth fabric. Because this piece wasn't long enough, I took scrap fabric and sewn it on, making it longer than it needed to be so I can cut it later. This seam line here will not be visible on the final product. We followed these instructions here to tie the gala skirt. Clayton tied it across his waist, tucked it through his legs, up against his stomach, and over top of the tie. And then he pulled the apron as far down as it would go. If done correctly, you will achieve a similar look to this. After your cloak and gala skirt are completed, it is time to dye your fabric. This is where you will need to pay extra attention to what fabric you are using, as that will determine what kind of dye you should use. You will need to read the back of your dye bottle carefully before buying it, or buy fabric in the color of your choice already. If you are using a drop cloth, this one in particular has 55% polyester and 30% cotton. According to the natural dye instructions, it is not used with fabrics containing more than 35% polyester, which means that when dyeing the drop cloth, we needed synthetic dye. Make sure to use a stainless steel pot or a pot that you don't care about ruining if you are using dye. As per the instructions, we put water on a stove and waited till it was nearly boiling. After that, we poured in our dye and stirred it for a few minutes. Then we moved into our stationary tub, where we poured it into a bucket. We then dumped in our gala skirt and cloak, and followed the instructions that said to stir the fabric and dye for up to 30 minutes. After that, you can take the fabric out, and using cold water, you wring out as much dye as you can until the water running through is consistently clear. Then you put it in the dryer. While that was drying, you can prepare other parts of the costume. At Home Depot, they sell this type of plastic chain, so we bought 11 feet of it to use across our multiple costumes. To measure specifically how much we needed for Malifaux, I wrapped it around Connor, and we took that measurement and doubled it, so both sides of the X. Back at the shop, using sandpaper, we roughed up most of the chain links to prepare for paint. Then we hung up the chains and spray painted them gold. There is no real easy way to paint a chain, as no matter the position, the links will always be touching. so you might have to do multiple passes. This means that there may be a lot of touch-ups that need to be done. That is, if you worry about that kind of thing, like we do. An issue we ran into when painting the chains is that the paint we used would flake off. We are not sure if this was the kind of paint we should have used, or the application method applied, but that was an issue we faced. To somewhat combat this, we bought metallic gold acrylic paint and filled in the gaps with a paintbrush when needed. We also put a finishing clear coat on top of the chain to lock in the color as much as we can, which, as previously explained, didn't work out too well due to the flaking, but it's the thought that counts. To make the rings that the chains will be attached to, we cut thin pieces of PVC pipe on a bandsaw and rounded the edges with a belt sander and sandpaper. You can also use a hand saw or Dremel application to sand and cut. We then spray painted them using the same gold color as before. By this point, your fabric should be done in the dryer, so you can go get it and prepared to add the clasps. We found an even spot where we wanted the gold rings to go, and we prepared to glue them down. We attempted a few different ways of gluing down the gold rings, including an attempt at putting a gold ring on the back so we can create a sandwich and secure the fabric in the middle. This did not end up working, so we ended up just using super glue and gluing on the golden rings right to the front of the cape. We used tape and clamps to secure the rings in place overnight to ensure a strong bond. We used scissors to cut out the fabric in the center of the circle, and used hot glue to fold back the excess. Using a bandsaw, we cut the gold chain and pried it open, so we can hook it onto the newly created rings. Because we have rings on the back and the front, we did the same thing for both. We made sure that the chains connecting to the front and to the back left a comfortable fit underneath Clayton's arms, and counted the chain links so we can use the same amount for the other side. It helps to pull up your design from time to time to make sure you are lining up with your plans. After the rings are put into place, the final detail would be the Wessex collar. As stated before, we were going to use gold iron-on foil, but decided to use gold beads instead. We got several types of beads from Jo-Ann Fabrics and started to sew them on. We got these coin-looking beads that were going to be sewn onto the collar, but did not end up making it due to the overall weight of the necklace in the end. We stuck with one type of bead and along the seam lines sewn on the detail with some gold thread. After they were sewn on, Malafa'ak's cloak is completed. These boots were made out of marine vinyl and patterned using a free online template and sewn together. They were then glued onto Goodwill slip-on dress shoes and put on by zipping up the back. To start Jean's cloak, you're going to do the exact same thing you did for Malfaak's cloak. We followed the same exact tutorial to a T, but instead of recreating the patterns, we used the ones we already made for Malfaak's cloak. Now, that part of the front is created. This is where the tutorial will deviate. Using the original concept art, we can get a good look at the differences that need to be made. The first one is that Jean has a hood, so using the provided pattern, or just cut a square that fits your head correctly, we sewn up the seams into the shape of an L, because you need this area open to sew onto the collar, and this is where your face will look out of. The hood was sewn on by pinning the front corner here to the front corner here, and carefully pinning all the way around. The hood will be too big, but that is okay. You can gather, or even ease, the wrinkles together, and slowly work them evenly across the neck of the cloak. That way, the wrinkles will look natural and planned. You don't want uneven bunching around the neck. After the hood is put on, you can also cut the triangle out of the bottom of the chest piece, and sew over the edge. At this point in the build, you will also have a lot of seams on the inside of the cloak. To hide these, take the seam allowance and fold it under, sewing it in place. You will then be left with 3 seam lines, 1 holding the cloak together, and 2 pinning down the seam allowance. To make the shanty, I used the same guide and template as previously shown. This time, the front flap will be tucked in, so you will tie the waistband and pull the back flap through your legs. You will then take that flap and tuck it into the top of the waistband, hiding all of the ties in the process. After the cloak and shanty are made, you are now ready to dye Jean's cloak. The same rules as before apply. Stainless steel pot, nearly boiling water, stir the dye, transfer it to a stationary tub, stir for 30 minutes, drain the excess dye, and dry. While the cloak and shanty are drying, you can start on the cape clasps. To create these clasps, you can use pieces of foam, but we will be using plastic. Because of this, we will need flat pieces of plastic, which come in various thicknesses online, or you can even find them at a plastic supply dealer, but we decided to make our own from PVC pipe. We did this by drawing a circle of a paint can lid that was the size that we would like our clasps to be. Then we traced that circle onto a piece of PVC pipe. We then cut the PVC pipe down to size, then cut it in half. Lastly, we used a heat gun and 2 pieces of wood to flatten the plastic. When heating plastic, it is super important that you wear a ventilator and have an open air circulation system, as the fumes that are given off are not safe. After the PVC is cooled down, you now have a small sheet of flat PVC plastic, with the circle still traced on it. We took it to our bandsaw and carefully cut out the shape, fixing any imperfections on our belt sander and with sandpaper. You can do this with a handsaw or even a Dremel as well. Which we ended up doing a total of 4 times, because this was needed as a way to secure the chain. Our idea was to cut an insert the same size as one link of the chain. We use super glue and clamps to secure those in place while drying. Once it was all done, we used gold spray paint to color them. We positioned the gold pieces on the cloak, and using superglue, tape, and clamps, we glued them into place. To add the other chain links in between the pauldrons, we used more of the Home Depot chain and made cuts into the sides of them, and carefully pried them open, and closed them once they were around the link. Be careful when doing this, because the links may break if you are too hard with them. We ended up supergluing the severed parts later to secure the bond. We also decided to put beads on Jean's cloak too, using gold thread and these beads of choice. We hand-stitched the beads into place, making a pattern depending on the shape of the bead. So, one big bead followed by 2 smaller ones, or so on and so forth, depending on what design you want. We followed the middle seam line as well as the border seam line, and once the beads were sewn on, the cloak is completed. To make the red X, we took computer paper and taped it together. While Clayton was wearing the cloak, I taped the paper to his shirt and wrapped it around his body. We did this to make a template, because if you cut a straight line out of fabric or vinyl, it will not conform to your body. So we decided to use more sloping techniques to ensure a better fit for the straps. After the shape is drawn, it is then cut out and reapplied to get a final look before we transfer it to the vinyl of choice. Using a roller, we evened out any imperfections along the drawing to ensure an even line across the strap. This is the rough shape when transferred onto the vinyl. We left about a ½ an inch of seam allowance. This is because the plan was to fold the edges in so we can hide the white edges of the vinyl. We use binder clips to secure the vinyl into place, so that straight pins do not leave holes in the vinyl. We then cut several slits into the seam allowance to allow for better folding. Using DAP Wellwood contact cement, we then glued down each fold. To use contact cement, put glue on both sides of the piece you are trying to glue, and wait till it gets almost non-sticky, which usually takes about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on room temperature and weather. Then stick them together. After all the edges are folded over, you should have a nice clean edge, and the inside should look as such. We then took these bands to the sewing machine, where we stitched down the glued parts to ensure a stronger bond. We used dollar store dog collars to create these straps along the shoulders. Everyone's distance will be different, so find one that is comfortable for you and repeat it for the other side, making sure to pay attention to what side you are sewing onto, and also pay attention to how you put the strap on. I would recommend writing down on the inside which side is the top and which side is the bottom, or front and back, as it can get confusing at times. Once the buckle is comfortably stitched in place, you can cut off the excess strapping, and the belts are completed. To make Jean's vambraces, we used a free template online of a vambrace, and picked the size that best fit Clayton. This was the shape of the vambrace. We took this and transferred it to the black marine vinyl. We cut out 2 shapes, one for the left and one for the right. On this template, then we drew the triangle detail and cut them out. This is so we can get the exact shape that will fit perfectly onto the final vambraces. We transferred these pieces to the same color red as used on the Red X straps, and left seam allowance in specific spots. Then we are going to do the same thing we did for the Red X straps, and using DAP Wellwood contact cement, we glued down the edges. Once cut out, we put glue on both sides and pushed them into each other. The final result will look like this. It is okay if the glue doesn't stick down all of the strap, but it should get most of it. Using more contact cement, we glued the red strips to the black base. After that was glued down, we carefully ran over top of the red strips in a sewing machine to secure the straps down. After the straps are secured, it is time to put in the zipper. We bought an 8-inch zipper from Joann Fabrics for each gauntlet. Using more binder clips, putting the zipper in as follows and sewed it into place. This is something that you need to pay close attention to, because if you mess up, you can seam rip, but it will leave holes into the vinyl, which will not look as good in the end. You will also need a zipper foot to sew on zippers for your van braces. After the one side of the zipper is sewn in, you will sew the other side. As you continue sewing, you will notice that you are making this inside out, which is the goal. After both sides are sewn together, flip the van brace inside out. Because the zipper is too long, you will need to make a new stopper for it. Put the edge of the zipper into the machine and run over the zipper about a dozen times. This will allow the zipper to stop where you want it to. Using scissors, you can cut off the extra length of the zipper. After this is done, you repeat these steps another time, and then you have 2 van braces. The last step is optional, but I took red and black Sharpies and covered any white spots that I can see from the vinyl. To make the white Martian's leather armor, we used a custom fit sloper that had been laid down on brown vinyl. If you do not have a custom fit sloper, you can use a fitted shirt to your liking. Take the t-shirt and fold it in half, with the fold being on the front of the shirt. Put the fold of the shirt on the fold of the fabric and follow the same steps as we are about to do. We cut out 4 shapes in total, with 2 front pieces on the fold and 2 back pieces separately. After you cut out a front and back, you can cut out another one, but on the wrong side of the fabric. We did this so we can sew 2 pieces together in an attempt at hiding the fuzzy fabric texture on the inside of the armor.
Fine pieces, Henry, and all right, Tommy, show them how the clip-on sounds down there in San Diego.
I then cut the top one to be a little smaller, so I can fold over the other piece on top of it, using binder clips to secure it in place. We would then sew these folds down, making a solid piece of double-sided vinyl. After the 4 pieces become 2 pieces, we used more binder clips and sewn up the side and shoulder seams. After this is sewn, you should be able to put on the armor by slipping it through the back as shown. We are using grommets and shoestrings to attach the armor. We evenly placed grommets on the sides of the armor and secured them in place. Some of these grommets ended up falling off, as we are not sure if the double layers of fabric affected the strength or not. Be wary if you are using grommets with 2 layers of vinyl.
Tommy in San Diego, Henry in Oakland, Matty in Los Angeles. I'll count it off. A 1, a 2,
To make the van braces for the White Martian, we're using the same template for Jean's van braces. This time we're using the same brown as we did for the armor. Because we were using ties for the van braces, we wanted to continue to double back the leather. Much like for the armor, we cut out 2 shapes per van brace, so 4 in total. We then cut one of them smaller and folded the edge over and sewn it down. The grommets had the same effect on the van brace as they did on the armor, and some did end up coming off.
and a song of the breeze. Blue River, why are you blue?
To make the Roman-style cloak, we used a piece of drop cloth that was around 8 feet by 7 feet. Your size may vary depending on your height. We draped it over Clayton's shoulder and used a binder clip to secure it in place to get an idea of what the final product could look like. We once again used the same template as before, but this time we made a subligar, which is basically the same thing as an Egyptian genti, but Roman, and is typically worn by the gladiators. We also cut a triangle shape into the front edge for detail and put on the subligar exactly as the diagram shows. Tie around the waist, pull up over the tie, letting the triangle hang over. We dyed the fabric in the same exact instructions as previously stated.
Something wrong. Blue River, maybe it's because I'm just as blue as you. Tell me why you thought never.
Because the dye did not affect the stitching of the drop cloth, we cut off the edge and sewn over a new clean edge. To make the brooch, we cut a piece of PVC pipe and using a belt sander and sandpaper, smoothed out the shape to make a smooth ring. We then used a heat gun to flatten out another strip of PVC and used a belt sander and sandpaper to smooth it and make it look like a pin. We used a heat gun to curl the edge over the circle and then cut a slit into said circle. That way, the pin can slide off and on and be secured through the fabric. Even still, we hid safety pins for extra measures when wearing the cloak to hold it down. We painted the pin silver and poked it through the fabric where it felt comfortable when draped over in various positions. These boots were made out of marine vinyl and patterned using a free online template and sewn together. They were then glued onto Goodwill slip-on dress shoes and put on by zipping up the back. To make the white Martian look like a white Martian, his skin will be edited in post-production. To make the white Martian spear, we used a long piece of PVC and scrap wood that was cut to a point. We cut a slit into the PVC and inserted the wood. We used a screw to secure it in place. And we used hot glue to cover the screw head, as the white Martians most likely did not have Phillips head screws. To make the slave tunic, we used the supplied template, but in reality, it is basically just 2 big squares, with neck and armholes cut into it.
A possible chance, I'd give a year of my life to hear you.
We made sleeves by making 2 long tubes and sewing them together. We then flipped the tunic inside out and sewn the sleeves to it. Once it was done, we flatted nice, clean edges. We did the same for the hood. We cut out a square and sewn on the bottom edge to the neckline. We had an old dirty looking rope that we used for a previous project, so we used it here too. We dyed this tunic with a little bit of the blue dye that was also used on Malafa'ak. We also wrapped the wrists in the same chain that Jean and Malafa'ak used on their costumes.
And I fell. It's wild, it's silly, it's well. I'm like a leaping gazelle today. Oh, I knew the minute I met you, I'd get a load of romance.
Remember, these costumes were made using techniques and methods that are widely usable among a variety of costumes, as Martian costumes are only the tip of the iceberg. Now that you have learned the basics of costume making, go put your newfound skills to the test, get creative, and go make a costume. Thank you, Justice Con, for giving us this opportunity at teaching all of you wonderful people how we made our Martian costumes. Now, for an exclusive first look at our film, The Last Son of Mars.
Johns, you have returned.
If any of you have any questions or just want to talk about costuming, please reach out. Our social media handles are at Twins of Boom on Twitter, Twins of Destruction on YouTube and Instagram. We would love to see what you are creating. We thank you so much for your time and for watching our panel, and we hope you enjoy the rest of Justice Con.